Hello and welcome back into the Reading Corner. Today we are going to be taking a look at Isaac Asimov's popular sci-fi novel Foundation. Now I certainly had some strong feelings about this one, but I am going to, for a few minutes at least, hold those thoughts and perspectives at bay while I give an objective summary of the plot, and then I'll launch into my final rating and why I felt the way that I did about the book. So the story opens up on the planet Trantor, which is the imperial capital of the entire galaxy. And we are given some very important facts from the outset. First, that there's 25 million inhabited planets in this galaxy, and all 25 million are under the control of the Galactic Empire. On top of that, we are presented with some introductory characters, but those characters do not necessarily stick with us throughout the duration of the novel. The novel kind of jumps around throughout time, so it ends up being that there are really three important characters throughout it. The first of these very important characters, and the most important overall, we get introduced to at the beginning is Dr. Harry Seldon. And Seldon is a professor of psychohistory, which is basically this field of study that allows people to predict the future by mathematical probabilities using some sort of psychology and human interaction. Um, Dr. Seldon has predicted that in the near future, relatively near within the next 3,000 years, the Galactic Empire will fall. And following this fall of the Galactic Empire, there will be a dark period of wars and instability, and he wants to try and shorten this dark period that he foresees of not being the Galactic Empire, and wants to try and get to a second Galactic Empire after the inevitable fall of the first. To that end, we find that Dr. Selden has essentially made a foundation where they are trying to make this great encyclopedia of all knowledge of human history, which, at least at the outset, we think is going to somehow help guard against these dark ages. So, in order to build their encyclopedia in peace without the political pressure of uh, the bureaucrats on the main planet of Trantor, Dr. Selden arranges basically for himself and for his foundation to be exiled to a planet called Terminus at the edge of the galaxy where the foundation really settles. And Dr. Selden actually is of old age and is going to die soon, so he doesn't end up ever making it off Trantor, but he records these videos of himself that are important later on, in which uh, he's basically walking through all of the preceding crises that he's imagined that will lead, the Foundation will lead itself through to get to the Second Galactic Empire and to be the seed of the Second Galactic Empire. And he's basically has this metal box that they have in the Foundation where he'll show up on a video screen from now and then whenever there is a crisis that is successfully resolved. The story then reopens 50 years later after Dr. Selden's death, the founding of the Foundation. We are introduced to the mayor of on the planet Terminus, and his name is Salvor Hardin. And Hardin doesn't have a lot of political power. The Foundation has most of the power at the time, but he ends up taking over kind of by coup power from the Foundation, and that's how he navigates successfully the first crisis in the series of crises. In this time, the box opens up with the members from the Foundation and Hardin watching as Dr. Selden, in his old age, gives this message about the current crisis that they've just went through and talks about how there will be two more crises, I believe, that they have to go through before they're kind of on a set path that will lead to the next empire. The next two crises, the first one is resolved about 30 years later by Hardin again, and that involves using religious manipulation essentially in order to make the larger planets in the galaxy not attack them because their subjects would not support that. And then the next crisis is resolved by a traitor named Mallow, new character after Hardin's death, and essentially he resolves the crisis by making it so that the other planet that the Foundation has gone to war with is dependent on them for many of their goods, for basically their whole nuclear economy. And so then that country cannot last very long in this kind of Cold War that they have going because of their interdependence and the stop in trade that happened when they declared war upon the Foundation. At the end of the book, all of these crises are resolved successfully, and there will presumably be in the next book more crises that will lead to the Second Galactic Empire. And that's where the plot ends. And to be transparent this time, I wanted to basically give my rating first before I gave kind of an explanation and a breakdown as to what I thought, what I liked and what I didn't. I am going to give that all after I give the rating just because I want to be transparent with where I'm coming from. So I give this book a 2 out of 5 stars and a 41 out of 100. And being that this is such a well-known series, I would definitely expect more out of it. But even if I believe it was not as popular as it is and it was just some random book I picked up in the store and thought to try, I still think I would rank it pretty low, probably still below 50. And that is because of the reasons I'm going to launch into. But first, I will give one positive note in terms of something I did like about the book. And the one thing I did like is that it used human characters. And in a lot of sci-fi books, in universes, there's kind of the introduction of alien life forms where it doesn't add anything to the story, and at least this book stuck to humans, and it's not always a bad thing to add in aliens, but where it's not needed, where it doesn't help the story out, I don't think that it's a good use of the reader's mental energy. And so I do like the focus still being on humans, and that is one thing I appreciate before I jump into the more negative side of the book. Most of my critiques of Foundation have to do with the overall structure as well as assumptions that I believe to be unrealistic, but then also just disagree with. My problems with the book literally begin on page 2 when the author says, by way of introduction, I shall read it to you. There were nearly 25 million inhabited planets in the galaxy then, and not one but owed allegiance to the empire whose seat was on Trantor. And I have problems with both parts of this statement. Let's look at the first part. 25 million inhabited planets. So I know suspension of disbelief is necessary for almost any, if not all, fiction. That being said, I do believe that there should be some sort of a limit to this suspension of disbelief, and that this 25 million inhabited planets has by far passed that limit. I think when we're defining the limit of the suspension of disbelief, it has to be in terms of what helps the narrative, what is believable within the structure of the narrative, and what can actually teach you something in the story. Now, this 25 million inhabited planets fact does not serve to help the story in any way whatsoever. Honestly, it is just a mental blocker right at the outset saying, we are dealing with something so huge that I can never capture it in the story, something so huge that that we will never cover all 25 million planets. And if you think about it, it's just so hard to believe that it just is a blocker at the very beginning. Like, we have this whole known universe and only one planet that we know of that's at current day that is supportive of human life. The idea that there would ever be 25 million just seems really out there. So that's just one blocker to making you get into the story more. Not the hugest thing in the world. I can skip past it. But when coupled with the next fact, then that's when it starts to become, I think this author is really out here, is trying to make me believe something very specific that I just don't buy into. So the next thing is that not one but owed allegiance to the empire whose seat was on Trantor. And think about our current world. Not everything is always going to be exactly like our current world. And there are forms of pseudo empire that rule much of the world, but we have one planet and we have 195 unique countries today. I don't think ever once in the history of Earth has everything been united under one empire. I mean, there were times when people just couldn't travel to each other, people just didn't know each other. There were times when empires were falling apart at the fringes. There were times like today where people have different cultures, and because of their different cultures, need a different form of government, need a different form of uh, representative democracy or monarchy, whatever matches their culture and their moral beliefs and that society. And unfortunately, this book really takes the perspective of empire as like almost some sort of a godhead that is needed. Um, this, like I say, even just getting rid of the problems that I have with empires for this first statement, I don't like that 25 million planets are all under one empire. It just doesn't seem very likely that that would ever be structurally possible. My second issue with this novel begins with the explanation of psychohistory, which is a large, if not one of the largest things that you have to buy into in order to enjoy the novel. And it's frankly ridiculous. In more than one place, Hari Seldon, the founder of psychohistory, is treated like a god in the book, who can predict the events of humanity on a large scale, thousands and thousands of years into the future. And not only can predict the large scale events of humanity, but can predict what you're going to say next, but can predict the exact reactions of his enemies. I think the main issue that I have with this is just a fundamental mischaracterization of humanity. No matter how pre-baked our societal values are, our education systems, things that would make us want to act in a certain way, humans are still have free agency, I believe, and still are not robotic. Humans are rarely predictable from minute to minute. Extrapolate that out across thousands of years, where one action could affect the event of all the other actions. Um, I don't believe that one person could predict the future down to the minutest event like Selden has done in this novel, thousands of years into the future. Again, making this really, really hard to buy into. And I've pointed out how it's really hard to believe that Selden could predict the events thousands of years into the future. But on top of that, this also raises a structural problem with the story. Um, since the outcome is so predetermined, reading it can be quite dull. Essentially, our characters are moving through their crises with no possibility left open for failure. I actually have an example of that, which I am going to get to in a second. So, one of the third of the main characters in this story, when he's moving through that third crisis, um, we get this quote from him, and I think it's really telling as to the perspective and the way that this novel and this series of novels is moving. So he says, "We know that Hari Seldon worked out the historical probabilities of the future. We know that someday we are to rebuild the Galactic Empire. We know that it will take 1,000 years or thereabouts. And we know that in the interval we will face certain definite crises." So, if we just take all of these facts for granted, uh, as I said, just kind of undercuts the story a little bit as well, because we know what the outcome is. So, what is the interest in that? Probably my biggest issue with this novel is the love of empire that pervades throughout. Um, it's not just through the events of the story, but also through the tone and the skew that the author seems to suppose that a forever empire is the solution to all of humanity's problems. And this, uh, I think I have planned to bring this up a little later as well, but this empire is poorly defined in terms of we don't know what the empire looks like, how it's run, what the policies of the empire are, what the standard of living is within the empire with versus outside of the empire. So it's just supposed that we're supposed to take for granted that this empire is the best thing ever, when it really we don't know that. It could be, it could not be. But here is what Dr. Selden has to say about the empire. "The empire, gentlemen, as has just been said, has stood 12,000 years. The dark ages to come will not endure 12, but 30,000 years. A second empire will rise, but between it our civilization will be 1,000 generations of suffering humanity. We must fight that." So, as we have just seen, Selden predicts 1,000 generations of suffering humanity, but if you read the book, you'll know that no evidence is provided as to why this has to be the case. And there certainly isn't a one-to-one relationship between empire falls and humanity suffers. And that relationship is not established within the novel either. And it even appears to be that during the time that there's no empire, people are pretty much living the same quality of life, if not better, in some places of the universe. On top of that, it's not just Selden. It seems to be almost every main character in the novel that has this same sort of love of the empire, adoration of the empire. And we really see this with the third main character, Hobart Mallow, when he discovers remnants of the empire about 150 years after its fall. And Asimov writes, "The empire, the words drilled. A century and a half had passed, but there was still the empire somewhere deeper in the galaxy, and it was emerging again out into the periphery." Mallow smiled. This sentiment that Mallow has just shown by smiling at the remnants of the empire represents much of the novel, and it's actually the entire premise of the novel. And if you look at the overall plot as a whole, the novel is just about basically people who are saying, okay, this one empire is going to fall. We don't like that. And, you know, at some point later, we are going to reestablish the empire. And the whole novel is people working towards that goal of reestablishing the empire. Um, this being as popular a book as it is, or at least as well known, widely read of a book as it is, um, it's of course going to be easily readable. It's of course going to have maybe some interesting characters, but really there's even like flaws in the novel, such as basically the lack of any female characters that I haven't gotten into. Um, but I just with the ideas presented in the novel and their unbelievability, that's where I see the main issues with the novel. Thank you guys for watching this edition of the Reading Corner. I know I went quite a bit longer than I normally do, but I did feel it necessary in this case to really explore all of my thoughts about Foundation. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please drop a like down below and subscribe for more reviews. I will see you next time.